Let's pick up on that story and also real concerns from water experts. We heard from Karen Bosman earlier in the program about mine waste water and raw sewage draining into nearby water sources. I'm joined now by Deputy Water and Sanitation Minister David Mahlobo. Deputy Minister, thank you so much for joining us. I really want to pick up on a point that was raised by Karen Bosman. She said that in 2020, your department, the Department of Water Affairs and Forestry, actually assessed that dam and found that there was too much water, too much liquid in it, and you asked for that dam to be dealt with. To your knowledge, was any action taken by Jagersfontein Development after Water Affairs issued that concern in 2020?
Well, thank you very much, Sally, and to a very good evening to your viewers. Firstly, let's join the leadership of the country led by His Excellency the President. He was there on site yesterday to convey our condolences and also indicate that the Department of Water and Sanitation, we are working with the leadership of government to actually support those communities because we know, for an example, that after the incident happened, there was one issue that the department was tasked that to ensure that there is no other incident happening. Especially, there are two tailing dams there. The one that managed to burst was carrying more than 2 million cubic meters per annum. Then there's another one. When we did an assessment, our engineers yesterday discovered that the wall is cracked. There is a potential of a further breakage down. Yesterday, we were to issue an instruction, which is a directive, that the mine must stop actually disposing water into the other remaining compartment. And we are happy to report that the mine has cooperated in dealing with that particular issue. They are disposing the water somewhere else right now. And we are looking at the issue of doing water samples because the river system and the dams that are there, especially the Jagersfontein, is affected.
So I'm going to, sorry, Minister, Deputy Minister, let me just stop you because you're saying such startling things that I just want to jump into that. So you're saying that there's a second tailings dam that was also being filled and being mined, and that you had a look at that mine, that dam, and there was a crack in that wall, and you raised the alarm after this disaster, and they've now stopped putting water into that dam. Is that right?
We want to confirm that our engineers, they are working with the mine, and the mine has responded positively to the directive, because the directive was issued when I was on site yesterday, and they have stopped actually pumping water into that. They are pumping it into pits so that there is no further hazards.
I mean, I think what's concerning... I'm so sorry. It's encouraging to know that they've stopped doing that, but it does seem somewhat at odds. You say there was a crack in the wall that the engineers picked up. I want to ask again about this 2020 situation, because your department apparently flagged that too much water was in that dam way back in 2020. What I need to know is whether, after issuing that directive, you checked to see if Jagersfontein Development had indeed complied with your directive.
Maybe first let's indicate that one, the department, when it was brought to its attention that there is this operation by this development, they had no water license from 2012. Ultimately, we engaged with them. There was a water license that was ultimately issued in 2018. With certain strict conditions about how their tailing dams must be managed and how the water must be managed. And in 2019, we did an assessment about their compliance. We're not very happy with their compliance level. It was around 82% their compliance. And in 2020, we did another compliance audit, and we discovered that they have dropped to 24%. Then we issued a directive that these operations, in terms of the license conditions, they must stop on the basis that they were actually putting more volumes of the discharge into the tailing dams as it was required, and it was posing a risk in terms of safety issues. We then directed them to produce a decommissioning plan so that they can be able to apply for new authorization. That mine was not able to respond as we wanted to on time. Ultimately, when we engaged with them in 2021 and until 2022, they were able then to produce another dam safety report where they then commissioned their own experts, because they are responsible in terms of the water license for whatever happened there, including the preparedness plan. Their own experts produced that dam safety report recently, now in August. Surprisingly, these experts, they said that tailing dam is very safe to be able to be used, and the structure is very stable. And we've taken a decision that now, because they've given us a false report, as part of the investigation, our intention is to suspend their water use license.
Okay.
But we're not going to suspend it irresponsible, because there are those residual issues they must deal with. But ultimately, we'll also approach the law enforcement agencies using the provisions in our law that they take full responsibility, including prosecution, because they never implemented the remedial actions.
Okay, so what you're telling me then is that you're seeing a series of years where they were actually, first of all, it took them a long time to get a water license, only up in 2018.
Yes.
And then sort of 2019 and 2020, they were only like 30% compliant. And then suddenly they come with this report that says everything's absolutely hunky-dory. The point that Karen Bosman is making is those reports need to be peer-reviewed. And if they weren't, they won't stand up to scrutiny. What I want to know from you, though, is do you have the capacity and do you regularly monitor and enforce compliance? Because I understand that ultimately they are the ones who are going to be in the firing line. But there is an important role for water affairs and any other implicated and involved government departments to make sure that people do what they say they're going to do. And what you've just described to me is an ongoing series of non-compliance. I'm just wondering why you didn't come down harder on them sooner.
Well, firstly, on the question of capacity, we do have experts as a department. Remember the issues around dam safety. We are part of the international convention around the management of dams. South Africa has more than 5,000 dams that we actually look up to, and there's a periodic review. And when it comes to issues of management infrastructure, annually, organizations that have our own water use licenses, they have their own responsibility to do self-assessment rather than the regulatory audits that are being done by government. There is a limitation in law, I must admit, Salim, when it comes to issues of non-compliance. The law in terms of administrative enforcement, it says firstly, give them a notice, they must produce a remedial action plan, and monitor whether there's a performance or defaulting on that one. Then you go to the next stage. The next stage, which is a directive, that was the stages we've done. But at the very same time, they then put this plan, and some organizations, they do comply or not. But we must be able to indicate that when it comes to mining operation, especially for this one, don't forget the historical context. This operation has been there since 1868. Even that infrastructure that is there, and you could see that underground mining, in terms of structural integrity, it has an impact on environment, especially acid mine drainage. It has an impact on occupational health and safety, issues of security. These are some of the historical legacies that our government must be able to handle in dealing with them. But indeed, the users, they must take full responsibility, because if you acquire a new rights to use that operation, you take the assets and liabilities.
Yeah, and you take on that responsibility. Deputy Minister, sorry to jump in like this, but I have to ask you a very important question about where we're at now. And this is something that Karen Bosman also highlighted. She is desperately concerned because she says from what she's seen, the sewage works was actually destroyed by this dam burst. And that she says we're likely to see a situation of raw sewage plus this the sludge, the silt coming from the tailings dam, getting very, very close to water sources. She said the Jagersfontein dam is 5 to 10 kilometers downstream. She believes that when the rains come, and it could be in the next day or two, this could then flood into nearby water sources and contaminate a large area of the water. She says that it's urgent that trenches need to be built to stop the silt moving, because as soon as it gets wet, it's fluid again. Temporary toilets for all. I want to ask you if you share her concerns, and whether you know if temporary toilets are being provided for all residents, and if these trenches are being built to stop this contaminated water and sewage moving into the broader water body.
As I indicated earlier, Sally, the first instruction we to do was to ensure that there is no further damages that are caused by big volumes that are still contained in the tailing dam that remain. That's why an instruction has been issued. It has been complied with. We are very happy with that. Our experts, even today, they are on the ground, continuing to do structural engineering assessment on the impact on water causes. We know that the sludge, it has been able to go over a square kilometer, a very big area that is there. And we know that certain water systems are affected. And we have actually taken some water samples as we speak, so that we don't have problems around issues of pollution for the Hofakis in terms of the ecosystem. But more importantly, the issues around access to water for human consumption. Now that the power is back, we are able to pump using plume water. We're able to give them 4 water tankering systems so that there are no problems. But when it comes to the possibilities that we're starting a raining season, government is busy in terms of clearing access to the site so that we can be able to ensure that we do testing of the ground, because we might have contaminated groundwater, but also the remedial action that the mine must undertake to clean up this area before we can have a lot of washaways. But in our own assessment, the metals and the toxins that might be possible be there, because it's a diamond mining operation. It can only be arsenic. And that's what we are able to try to be able to manage. But we are very concerned that if those remedial actions are not implemented, the risks are going to be very much higher. Yeah. But the most important aspect is that we must also deal with the issues of decommissioning a close-up plan. Remember, it's an underground operation as we speak right now, and there's water underground. And when it starts raining, you will have the issues of the ingress that can go in there, start to flood that particular area, and some of those issues of occupational health and safety will be an issue.
I mean, you are describing a very complex situation, and there's so many layers. It is encouraging to hear that you've got engineers on the ground who are absolutely all over this. So let's hope that everything is being done. Thank you so much for your time this evening. It's much appreciated. Water and Sanitation Deputy Minister David Mahlobo, and just admitting there that they simply don't have the capacity to check on every single tailings dam, that their directives are followed. They did issue a directive around this dam that it was getting too full back in 2019-2020. He's also citing his concerns, his suspicions around an engineering report of just a few months ago that suddenly indicated everything was fine with that dam. There are a lot of questions around this story. We're going to stay on this in the days to come here on SA Tonight.